Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and I'm going out on the top shelf. Yeah! Oh, of course I blew the last one. All right, have fun with this one, guys. All right, so this is Baltimore, the secret heart that bleeds life's blood into the mechanisms that control modern American society today. Because American culture was bred here. From religion to medicine to media and popular culture, the American way of life was developed here, right down to the national anthem and our national identity. And given today's political climate, perhaps it's no coincidence that the very location said anthem is sung about points directly to Mecca. But regardless, when filtering Baltimore's uncelebrated significance through the flat earth, mud flood, false history prism, an amazing story can be told. One that finds the key figures in Maryland history, the ones that the mainstream narrative doesn't celebrate, as covertly running the recovery, rebuilding, and repopulation initiatives of the New World, right out of Baltimore. And the bulk of my early work was dedicated to fleshing out these ideas. But like all good things, it must come to an end. And while it pains me to leave so many dangling strings, it's time to move on. And so I can think of no better way to go out than with a feature-length old-school mudflood video that lays out the city of Baltimore the way the main architects of fragile fractalism tell us they saw it, by making good on a promise that I made near the beginning of my show to have some fun with the maps. And so we're going to take a tour of 1822 Baltimore and see if they left any clues that support the mudflood fake history paradigm. And we're going to use both 1822 city plans and this 1832 pocket-sized travel guide. But mostly we're going to use this 1822 city plan and its depictions of city landmarks, of which there are 37
in a row,
located along the border of this map. And this map is hailed as a triumph of city planning. And so as such, it has a pretty amazing story. And so let's start with a very basic history lesson, as the modern narrative lays it out. Lord Baltimore's colony of Maryland, for all intents and purposes, was founded in 1634. And the town of Baltimore isn't founded for another 95 years, in 1729. And it was incorporated as a municipality in 1796, ultimately becoming an independent city in 1851. And so what this means in Mud City is that Lord Baltimore's conquest, scouting, recovery team, what have you, showed up in what they tell us was 1634, and that it took them 95 years to take over, recover, or whatever, the area known as Baltimore. At least enough to get it up and running. And then Baltimore announces itself in earnest in 1797, later throwing itself a full-blown coming-out party known as the War of 1812. Historians will be quick to tell you that it'd be blood pudding and cricket instead of baseball and apple pie were it not for Baltimore. And in the wake of this conflict, Baltimore is a city on the grow. And like the other major cities at the time, they needed city plans so they could map the growth of the city, which again had more than tripled in population since the 1792 plan. And so on March 25th, 1812, on the doorstep of war, the city commissioners publish ads in the local Baltimore newspapers holding an open call for surveyors to submit street surveys. And among those who answer the call is one Thomas Holdsworth Poppleton, recent immigrant to Baltimore from London. And he was a surveyor by trade and looked at this as an opportunity to get his name out there. And spoiler alert, it's his street surveys from this period in 1812 that form the basis of not only his future city plan of 1822, but also for the other 1822 city plan, which was prepared by Baltimore's own Fielding Lucas Jr., America's preeminent publisher of maps and atlases at the time. And, of course, this just begs the question, what did Baltimore need two city plans for? And could these maps betray Baltimore's real history? And how or why is it that Thomas Poppleton was able to get this gig? Because once you scratch the surface on him, he becomes another one of those characters that doesn't quite fit right. At least not the way the gatekeepers present him anyway, right? And of course, this starts with the fact that I couldn't find an image for him to use, but it didn't take long to see just how well Tommy Poppleton fits into the Mud City paradigm. Because of course, the gatekeepers also offered no information about his childhood or who his parents were, picking up his story when he's baptized, right? Not born, but baptized. And they offer us nothing else, picking up his story when he's 15 and apprenticed off to the Honorable Company of Vintners, who control the sale of wine and alcohol in England. And so my fat senses immediately connect him to our boy Dionysus. But eschewing the wine trade, Tommy starts his own surveying practice in 1805 in London. But after a bad partnership, he finds himself in debtor's prison, but is spared doing any real time behind bars by a royal decree forgiving debts less than £1,000. And so he kicks around London for a little while after this before deciding that there are greener pastures in America, and more specifically in Baltimore. And this is where the story turns, because ostensibly, Poppleton shows up in Baltimore a complete stranger, and a broke one at that. Yet just by submitting samples of street surveys, he's embraced by John Eager Howard and his brother Cornelius, who champion his designs to no avail, because he does not win this commission. But a strong friendship develops between him and the Howards. And the Howards weren't Poppleton's only friends and benefactors during his early days in Baltimore. The author of this Gatekeeper-approved article was kind enough to let us know that Poppleton had a trinity of mystery support once he gets to Baltimore, in the form of Joseph Townsend, a bookbinder and teacher by trade, who goes on to start the third oldest fire insurance company in America. And one of the mysteries surrounding this guy is why the Baltimore Equitable Society's wiki page does not mention him, even though the first offices for the Baltimore Equitable Society were in his house. But regardless, it is just crazy the way that insurance companies keep creeping their way into this story, which is getting a little out of control because when I went looking for anything I could find on Joey T here, the first person that Googly gave me was this Joseph Townsend, who is a medical doctor, geologist, and rector in Mud City favorite Wiltshire. But not only that, he is the personal preacher to the Dukes of Atall.
What? Yup.
So are you kidding me? And so now, given the little information we actually have about this Joseph Townsend, it seems completely reasonable to me that he could be related to this Joseph Townsend, and therefore in connection with the Dukes of Atall and all of this insanity. The old fat senses are tingling like crazy around this. And so between this and the Howards being the keepers of the Royal Forest of Baltimore, this friendship makes a whole lot more sense to Mud City when it's filtered through Poppleton's vintner associations, especially considering I have wasted drunk satyrs prancing around Howard's Woods. And Poppleton's fortunes continue to rise when he moves to New York shortly after this and works on the underground sewer tunnels of Manhattan. And so he's connected to the tunnel network under America too. And he also surveys New York to much praise while he's at it. And so it's after this that he's called back to Baltimore by the Howards to make the city plan, which had stalled thanks to the War of 1812. And this map emerges roughly 3 years later. Again, a map Fielding Lucas uses for his own city plan. And the biggest difference between the two is that Fielding adds a lot more buildings and landmarks to his map. And he also includes a nifty population table for our convenience. But the real fun is to be had with Poppleton's map. And so to add a little practical perspective to Poppleton's city plan, and to demonstrate how big it was and how hard something like this was to make, this map was 112 by 125 centimeters large. So that's 4 feet by 4 feet, essentially, right? This thing was huge. And it was made from a single steel plate engraving. And so that means somebody, in this case, engraver Joseph Cohn, no image, he hand-etched with flawless precision all of these straight lines and fine line details into a 4 by 4 steel plate. And as talented as Mr. Cohn may have been, the map actually needed to be this big because he was kind enough to include not only the drawings of these buildings, but he also tells us when they were built, who built them, and how much they cost. And I think it's here that the gatekeepers have slipped up, because the numbers don't seem right to me. And so let's have some fun with Baltimore landmarks circa 1822. And when approaching this map from just the drawings alone, there are problems right from Jump Street, because these landmarks are laid out alphabetically, and the Basilica, which was called the Metropolitan Catholic Church back then, perhaps rightfully sits in the A position. But the problem is that somehow there are two A's. Rembrandt Peale's Museum and Gallery of Fine Arts is also labeled with an A. And going along the top shelf, the alphabet runs in order all the way to the letter L, but they skip the letter J for some reason. It picks up with N, going all the way down the right border to Z. And so I don't know if you noticed, but it's clear that the left and right borders of this map have been hastily cut and pasted. Check out these paste lines that don't match the map, because they cut off the edges of the dividing quatrefoils. And don't get me started on how amazing it is that these medallions or whatever are separated by quatrefoils. These alterations alone are enough for me to question the veracity of this map. Why was it altered this way, and why double up on the letters A through L the way that it does? Because the left column also starts with A with the Basilica and runs down to L, skipping the J again. But this is very strange, because if you're using these letters as intended, which is to locate these landmarks, like the Basilica or Peale's Museum and Fine Art Gallery, right, it would get awfully confusing because they're not located anywhere near one another. There are 10 landmarks marked by the same letter along this border. That's not confusing at all, right? And so these changes are very curious to me. And you can make of them what you will, but I'm guessing that the Colonel hipped Poppleton to the fact that this is Baltimore, and his sister's shrine to Diana needed to go first. Because remember, in Mud City, Sophia Howard is the high priestess of the Diana cult that's really running the show. But whatever the reason, Poppleton or whoever was truly responsible for this map was directed to put the Basilica or the Metropolitan Catholic Church first. And so let's start there. And we're given its address, which of course hasn't changed, and the date it was consecrated, and that it cost $225,000 to build, and that it was designed by Benjamin Latrobe, America's first trained architect, if you can believe that. Don't know what the architects before him were doing. Did they get their degrees out of Cracker Jack boxes? Yeah, I don't know. But to me, the first thing that really sort of jumps out at me about this sketch is that it doesn't look anything like the Basilica does today. And that's because the building wasn't finished until 1863. So it took some 40 years from this drawing to add the bell towers and the Romanesque portico. Okay, something stinks about this story, because our boy Benji the architect includes this drawing in the 1832 travel guide. And so I don't know about you, but this certainly looks finished to me. What were they doing between 1832 and 1863 to complete this thing? All right. And, I'm tempted to say that this is Benji's original architectural design for the building, perhaps used so he wouldn't have to draw another one, but that just doesn't make sense for a travel guide. You'd be wandering around Cathedral Hill here and looking for this, but might not find it if it still looked like this. So right off the bat, we get some strangeness. But the two things that stand out to me most about this drawing, and first is how much this building reminds me of a mosque more than a Catholic church. And so is this a tribute to Christianity's origins in the Middle East? Or is this building a holdover from an earlier Arabesque culture that inhabited Baltimore? And this thought, of course, has my apophenia binging all the way to the McMecca alignment, as it's wont to do, right? Especially with the Unitarians across the street. And more on this building later. But the other thing that really stands out to me is the artist's use of shadow, which gives this building a sense of time and orientation. The sun is behind this building to cast these shadows, and I happen to know that this is oriented west to east, so this is an early morning portrait. I don't know, for some reason that's really interesting to me. But one thing this rendering doesn't make clear is that this is on top of a hill and that there are catacombs underneath it. Catacombs that, until very recently, were filled with mud. But I'm digressing here, right? So let's get back to it. And so, again, we were told that this building was consecrated in 1821, and that it cost $225,000. But we know that construction on this building started, allegedly, in 1805, so some 16 years earlier than this map. And so to determine the dollar values, I split the difference and used $1813 for the cost comparison, since I have no way of knowing where or when Poppleton pulled this figure from. And this is important because the value of the dollar fluctuated wildly between 1776 and 1822, ranging anywhere from $20 to $28 in buying power today. And so with this split at $1813, $225,000 then equals $5.4 million today. And so if you ask me, this is if it really cost $5.4 million to build this, that was money well spent. But was that really the building cost? Or was that the refurbishing cost? Nabonidus showed us that temples needed to be made over to fit the reform changes he was making to the state religion. And so the possibility exists that this building could have been found in a state of some sort of disrepair. Or maybe that it just needed a makeover to fit its new Catholic sitters. Or, as Mud City likes it, that this thing has been a temple to Diana for millennia, and it just needed a sprucing up. And so let's just stick this idea in our back pocket for now and move along to the other A on our list, Rembrandt Peale's Museum and Gallery of Fine Art, which we're told is the first building specifically designed to be a museum. That before this building, museums repurposed other spaces, like Rembrandt's father, Charles Willson Peale, his first museum is on the second floor of the Philosophical Society building in Philadelphia. But it's no accident or coincidence that this building is A number 2, because it's far more important than its humble outcome. More on that down the line. And so they tell us that it was established, not built, in 1813, complete with windows that appear to be below grade level. And that it was established by Rembrandt Peale, who was Charles Willson Peale's eldest son, and that it cost $18,000 to make. And so doing that math, $18,000 in 1813 equals roughly $396,000 today. And they also tell us that this building was designed by one R.C. Long, and we're going to talk more about him towards the end as well. And so moving right along, next on the list is the Assembly Rooms building, which was built by a company. You don't say. Which company built the Assembly Rooms? But they do tell us that it was located on the corner of East Fayette Street and Holiday Street. And they let us know that the city library is kept inside and that it cost $38,000 to build. And this one was also designed by R.C. Long. But this is one of the few that don't give a year on it. So with a little digging, I found out that this building was allegedly built in 1797 and that a third floor was added in 1835. And so here's a later, fancier drawing of the Assembly Rooms building. And so I ask again, did they build this building or did they recover and refurbish this building? Did they really add a third floor or did they just dig out a lower one? Because look where the stairs and this arch and these below grade windows are in 1822. And you come over here and it certainly looks like this front door opens onto the street and not onto a staircase. Did they bury this whole level to make this doorway even with the ground while adding a third story at the same time? Or did they just dig out more of this foundation and expose a pre-existing level? I don't know, but this apples to apples comparison of these buildings makes me go, Especially when they're compared to Benji's 1832 travel guide drawing, where he has the Assembly Rooms looking like this. And so the first thing that hit me was, where did all of the below grade features go? I mean, he just completely leaves them out. Why? I mean, did they just patch all of these up and completely change this doorway in 10 years' time, only to add a completely new level at a much later date? What is going on with the Assembly Room building? And unfortunately, we'll probably never know the truth of it because this building meets a fiery end, naturally. But when I initially read the location, I had to ask myself, wait a minute, isn't that where Baltimore City Hall is? And sure enough, City Hall is located on the corner of Fayette and Holiday Streets. And so stringing that along, could City Hall be a refurbished assembly room house? But unfortunately, the narrative and this map say no. Right, this map puts the assembly rooms on the other side of Holiday Street, opposite of where City Hall is today. And just briefly, I do want to mention how much Baltimore City Hall reminds me of Clarendon House. Is that a coincidence? Yeah, I don't know. But while doing my diligence on City Hall, I learned a few interesting things about the early city government. And so let's switch it up to this late 1800s pencil sketch of City Hall, but I learned that the city government in its earliest of days met at the Maryland Insurance Company building on South Street from 1801 to approximately 1812. So unfortunately, I could learn nothing about this Maryland Insurance Company, but that the earliest Baltimore city government met there and then left the same year that the War of 1812 broke out tingles the old fat senses and makes me wonder just how much of that conflict, or Baltimore's participation in it anyway, was an insurance fraud scheme. And it also makes me wonder how far in advance could they have been planning the Great Fire of 1904? Because sandwiching a 5-year stint where the city government did in fact meet at the Assembly Rooms building, so I wasn't all that far off in conflating the two, the city government actually met from 1830 to 1875. So for 45 years, they met at Rembrandt Peale's Museum and Gallery of Fine Arts. Wait a minute, what? The Peales hosted the Baltimore city government in their museum for 45 years? Right, this is just incredible, especially for what it means to the story of the Peales. This is just crazy. Crazier still because in the 1832 travel guide, Benji actually calls this building City Hall and not a museum and gallery of fine art. What is the real likelihood that they were both? You know, how much government work could have been going on as people perused the exhibits of a museum and fine art gallery? I don't know. And let's not forget about Ebenezer Hazard's connections to insurance companies and museums, right? But, enough digressing. There'll be more on that somewhere down the line as well. And so anyway, we're told that the assembly rooms cost $38,000 to build, and being allegedly built in 1797, that would put the cost at roughly $918,000 today. So just under $1 million. But I'm not buying it. To me, the story of the assembly rooms building is fishy AF. And so, moving right along, coming in at the letter C, we have the literally insane story of the hospital, which we're told was built by Baltimore County and was enlarged by donations from the state of Maryland to the tune of $140,000, and that it was designed by G. Milliman. And so the word enlarged suggests that there was a building there already, which is telling in and of itself. But when did these enlargements take place? There's no date listed on this medallion, but looking at its location on the map, it's on the same plot of land that Johns Hopkins sits today. A hospital, they tell us, wasn't built for another 60 plus years. And so I asked myself, could this Hopkins building be this original hospital building made over? Because the narrative says that this building was demolished to make way for the new Hopkins building. Sure it was. And so it turns out that, according to the gatekeepers, this hospital was originally known as the Public Hospital of Baltimore, and it was allegedly built in 1797, just like the assembly rooms, both apparently built with population growth in mind. And so doing some digging, it turns out that this allegedly wasn't built until 1798, and that this hospital actually dates back to 1794, when one Captain Yellett, or perhaps Yella, if the T is silent, establishes a retreat for ailing mariners, whom I'm guessing came down with a bad case of shore leave, considering this location is over a mile from any port in the city, and that Captain Yella built a building that may or may not have been located on this spot and incorporated into this building, and that the enlargements started taking place in 1798 after the General Assembly passes an act to build a new hospital for the relief of indigent sick persons and for the reception and care of lunatics. And it's interesting that they say that construction started after the site was purchased from Captain Yella in May 1798, and that the building was occupied later that year, indicating that the new building was built quickly or that there was reconstruction going on, right? And There's a lot of weirdness around the story of the construction of this hospital. This is really just a Cliff Notes version. But regardless of how it happened, this building was built and opened by the end of 1798, just in time for a yellow fever outbreak. And all the while these enlargements are happening, and they were completed by 1819, leaving the building as we see it in this drawing. And it says that when these enlargements were completed, this building could accommodate about 40 lunatics and 150 other patients, or roughly 200 patients in total. Now, look at the size of this thing. Does a max occupancy of roughly 200 patients make sense here? About as much sense as the money they spent on this. Because Poppleton tells us that this enlargement cost $140,000 over a 15-year period or so. And I wish I knew where he came to this figure, because there's one source that has these renovations costing $154,000 by 1819. But when you actually add up these listed figures of money appropriated for these refurbishments, they add up to $163,000. And so $140 to $154 to $163,000. These are huge disparities. And one report even has these renovations exceeding $200,000. But this may have actually been the city attempting some real estate fraud to inflate the asking price for a proposed sale of the property. And this brings up something else to consider, that the prices listed on this map may not be accurate at all, and that the building costs or renovation costs or what have you could have been much less than what's listed here. Some of these prices may be inflated, and cheap construction materials may have been used because apparently this hospital building was falling apart by 1834, barely 15 years after all of these renovations were complete. But despite all of that, they keep fixing the old girl up until it's decided to move the hospital out of the city to its present location in Catonsville, and this spiffy new building made for it, which allegedly started construction in 1853, but wasn't completed until 1872, thanks to overspending and a little Civil War interruptus. And it's after this new hospital opens that Johns Hopkins executors allegedly purchased this property, demolishing this building to build their new hospital. But the story of Spring Grove doesn't end there for us, because Spring Grove goes on to conduct a 13-year study on the use of LSD in the treatment of psychological conditions. And this is just amazing. And these types of studies could have been going on off the books for years by this time, because allegedly LSD was discovered or invented, as the case may be, in 1938, with human trials beginning in 1943. And this plays right into the Mud City paradigm, because in Mud City, Gen Pop has been getting dosed by God knows what for decades now. And all of this lunatic asylum talk harkens back to my boy the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, and the idea that these lunatic asylums were set up for people who were rejecting the new programming. And of course, seeing all the public funds being thrown in this direction as far back as 1798, it's clear the governments of Baltimore and Maryland viewed lunatic asylums as good business, and they still do. And even better, the alleged site of the old lunatic asylum is now home to the Bloomberg Center for Public Health. Are you kidding me? And of course, the Bloomberg Center for Public Health was started by the Rockefeller Foundation. And so it's amazing that the institution dictating so much of our public health policy today is located on the site of a lunatic asylum.
Oh, sweet irony!
This is just a fantastic story, right? From lunatic asylum to Hopkins to LSD to Bloomberg. It's just incredible. And so closing it out on this hospital building so I can move on, using the provided $140,000 figure, this enlarged hospital cost in the neighborhood of $3.5 million today. Next on the top shelf is the courthouse, which was another Gene Milliman production, and it was finished, not enlarged, not improved upon, not built, but finished in AD 1813. But I found out that construction allegedly began in 1805, same year as the Basilica. So I guess it was important to them to have their religious and legal institutions get off the ground at the same time. And this courthouse allegedly cost a whopping $150,000 over that 8-year period, or roughly $4 million today. And like the hospital before it, the main courthouse in Baltimore City today sits at this location. And so this monstrosity was allegedly constructed between 1896 and 1899. And so there's no way that these are the same structure, right? And so with the bias being that this map is lying, the truth of it is that there's no proving that this building ever existed in the first place. It requires faith in the source material to believe this building existed. So this monstrosity could have been there the whole time. But regardless, history does tell quite the story for courthouses in Baltimore. The first of which was allegedly located where the Battle Monument stands today. And what's interesting about this is that when they wanted to extend Calvert Street further north, they allegedly raised that first courthouse building off the ground, and the traffic of Calvert Street would run underneath it. And unbelievably, even though this first courthouse was allegedly demolished 32 years before the travel guide comes out, Benji includes it among his drawings. And even better is that he gives us a before and after. And so this is the courthouse before it was raised up over Calvert Street, which apparently didn't exist at all at this time. And this little building here is the powder magazine. Yep, they stored gunpowder right beneath a government building. Guy Fawkes and the gunpowder plot, anyone? And this gets better because here's the courthouse after they raise it up, which was allegedly done to extend Calvert Street, which, if they did, you would still be going over a cliff to pass underneath this thing. And so the question I have is, why do this at all? They level this whole thing about 15 years after they go through the trouble. Why? They were clearly planning on extending Calvert Street because it's on the 1792 city plan, presumably raised on high this way. So you're trying to tell me that they spent the next 8 years going nowhere through this tunnel? I don't know, but I do love that Benji has now given me this sort of riverbank imagery for this feature on the map. I really love that. But while digging into this story, I did find a Baltimore City plan I had never seen before. And this one's from 1801. And sure enough, the courthouse or the battle monument or something is in this spot, even though the narrative tells us that there shouldn't be anything there in 1800. So that's kind of interesting. But not as interesting to me as perhaps my favorite feature on this map, which is the title area up here. Because it has our girl Diana in her role as Queen of the Harvest, shepherding over the world. It's really amazing. You just cannot make this type of thing up. But regardless, the main point of this story is that the story of the first courthouse in Baltimore stinks. But, regardless, they tell us that this is where the Battle Monument stands today. Also interesting about this location where the Battle Monument stands today is that it was the location where the Declaration of Independence was given its first public reading in Baltimore. And then, some 39 years later, on the same spot, they're dedicating a monument to people who were killed in another war with Britain. And so there's an interesting coincidence there, and we're going to talk more about the Battle Monument later on as well. But before moving on, I do want to showcase this picture of the new courthouse as a prime example with what was possible with photo editing at the turn of the last century. And this isn't even a very good example because you can clearly see that this image was cut and pasted and that these people and this horse and these poles were drawn on. But I do like that you can see the grade of this building by looking at these basement windows. Because when you go to the courthouse today, these windows go deep below the sidewalk. And here's my best attempt at recreating this image, but what it doesn't show is the giant concrete fence or barrier that runs around the other side of this building. And so here's that. All right, so there's my stick against this portion of the fence, barricade, whatever you want to call this thing. And my stick is 57, 58 inches tall, so... And again, okay, so now I'm hanging over the barrier. And I don't know... Ooh, there's more brick down there. I have to see if I can't get a better look at that. Hopefully you can see it. It's hard to see the face of my camera doing this. But this is an easy 20-foot drop. if not more. I don't know if you can see that pipe hanging out of there. This is a deep trench around the courthouse. You know, why? You know, especially when they build the sidewalk up to the sides of so many other buildings. Why is this moated out the way that it is? This window right here in front of me, that would be completely below the sidewalk if they put the sidewalk up to the side of the building, and all of these going down. And so moving on. All right, so coming in at E is for expensive. We have the Union Bank, which is another R.C. Long production, right? So his resume is growing. And Poppleton gives us a lot of information about the Union Bank, except for when it was built. And so Googly informed me that the Union Bank was built in 1807. And Poppleton informs us that it cost $112,000. And so this works out to just over $3 million today, which is quite the price tag for a building like this given the era. And so I have to wonder how much of that money was invested in the basement vault or brick strong room, as they were called at the time. Because Poppleton lets anyone handling this map know where there's $2 million in capital just hanging out. And looking at it, it's $2.5 million. So, you know, it's a lot of money. This is roughly $69 million today.
69, dudes!
And he lets us know when that money exchanges hands. So any whore, pusher, thief, or con man stumbling around Baltimore had 2.5 million reasons to loiter in front of the Union Bank. At least during the months of January and July, anyway. And I love that their discount days are on Mondays and Thursdays. You know, what kind of discount did you get at the bank in 1822? But regardless, you know, all of this action takes place just a stone's throw from Baltimore's financial and political district, you know, which is filling out nicely, right? We have the bank over here, we have the courthouse, the battle monument erect in the center. Up here we have Rembrandt's City Hall, where I'm sure he's painting up portraits of the perfect city government, right? And then we have the assembly room / library. And so again, filling out nicely down here, right? And so not to leave it out, we have Latrobe's picture of Union Bank from the 1832 travel guide, right? And right away it's like, where did these grade level windows come from? Because they're not on this 1822 illustration. So why did he add them? Or why did this artist leave them off? And at the very least, we have to ask ourselves, what is up with Benji Latrobe and these grade level windows, right? Because he adds them here, but takes them away here. So this is very strange, right? They say the devil is in the details, and the details of Benji Latrobe's illustrations just aren't adding up. And so next up, what the F? It's the Exchange and Custom House. Another Benji Latrobe joint. And wouldn't you know it, the company strikes again. Which company? Because they put an astronomical sum of money into this building. $500,000 or $13 million today. And I believe this is the most expensive building on the map. And it was located in that same Monument Square neighborhood as the assembly rooms and the courthouse and Peale's art gallery. And so here's Benji's tour guide image of it, which is just much easier on the eyes, right? And yeah, so the Exchange and Custom House was what they said it was, right? This was the stock exchange where international trade through Baltimore was regulated. And we talked about the telegraph that was allegedly connected to one of the windows of this dome. But to me, these look like two separate buildings. Like this tower with the dome in the center is a different construction than these two warehouse additions on the side. And so in Mud City, I have this center part with the dome as a genuine old world American structure, whatever that may mean to you, and that these warehouses were built later on, but conceivably earlier than we're told this building was built. And one of the reasons I think this is that because the dome was allegedly supported by 12 ionic columns of Italian marble. And so with the help from my stalwart companion Googly, we determined that 12 ionic columns of Italian marble cost $55,000 in 1815. And that would have been before the shipping, which also would have been exorbitant, perhaps as much as the cost of the columns themselves. How is this not prohibitively expensive in 1815? Not to mention impractical. And there are marble monuments and buildings going up all over the place at this time. So it must have been a very lucrative time to be in the Italian marble trade. I'm very curious as to where all this money was coming from. If the money was even legit, because apparently our friends in the company may have been running their own real estate scam. Because while Poppleton tells us that the Exchange and Customs House cost $500,000, apparently the true cost was a little bit closer to $200,000. And so, did the members of the company just get to whack up this $300,000 overture amongst themselves? Yeah, my fat senses tell me it's so. And there is a picture of this one, which was apparently taken just minutes before its inglorious demise because they knocked this thing down and replaced it with this building. And I'm willing to bet that those columns aren't made of marble. And so next up at the G spot is the Commercial and Farmers Bank, which was located downtown on Howard and German streets. And if it made it that long, this building would have been taken out by the Great Fire of 1904. And I love this one because you can still find buildings like this in Baltimore today. And this one was allegedly designed by one Godefroy, who we haven't mentioned yet, but he was at one time partners with Benji Latrobe, and we'll talk more about him down the line. And this bank allegedly had a capital of $1 million, or roughly $25 to $26 million today. And their discount days are on Tuesday and Fridays, with dividends being paid in May and November, and their elections held in May as well. And so the Commercial and Farmers Bank doesn't fool around. But there's no date on this one either, so Googly helped me determine that this bank was built in 1810. So this $30,000 figure works out to about $800,000 today. And here's Benji's 1832 action scene, and at least I do love these 1832 ones because they do at least provide like something that looks like streets. But that's one of the things that make the 1822 illustrations so interesting, right? That there really isn't anything around them. And so if this building was really located on the corner of Howard and German Street, it would have been at the corner of this very busy intersection right downtown, which looks like this. All right, so this is the greater downtown area, right? We would have the cathedral up here. This is where the bank would be. And this is the financial, political center of the city over here. And so I have to wonder, does the lack of any sort of street scene around these illustrations on the 1822 map, could they betray the fact that maybe there were no streets around these buildings and that the streets were actually designed around them and not the buildings designed around the street? I'm sure there's always an explanation, but I don't know. To me, I think this is a great observation to make comparing the two source materials, right? The 1822 city plan and Latrobe's 1832 travel guide. All right, there's definitely streets around these things for him. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just my apophenia running wild, right? But I think maybe there could be something there. But before closing out on this one, I love the sense of depth in the entrance both illustrations give this bank. And so next up, our old friend R.C. Long returns with the University of Maryland building. And this one's still standing today, and in fact is the oldest medical education building still in use in the United States. And we've talked about this building before. It showed up in the story of the Howards' covenant with Baltimore City to develop this neighborhood. But I think the stated purpose for this dome room is very interesting. Not so much that it was, or perhaps still is, an anatomical theater, but that there's a circular chemistry hall underneath it. And so, never having been inside this building, what I'm imagining is that this dome was at one time a tower, and that these sides and this portico were added later, but conceivably much earlier than we've been told. Much like how I see the Exchange and Custom House. And while we're told this thing opened in 1813, it was actually built in 1812, of course. And so $200,000 in 1812 puts the tab for Davidge Hall at roughly $5 million today. And so next up, we have the incredible story of the disappearing almshouse. And you know this one's going to be good because they double our pleasure. It's two buildings. The first one erected at Calverton in 1815 to the tune of $40,000 by our boy R.C. Long. So that makes 5 on the top shelf for him. And so I'm thinking it's this shaded one, and again, I love the shadows on these drawings. And so they go on to tell us that this building was enlarged by the trustees of the Poorhouse of Baltimore County in 1820, and that they spent $100,000 on this enlargement. though it's not complete. And this building was designed by newcomer to the list, J. Morton. And so pooling the tabs on the cost of both of these buildings, it comes in at roughly $6 million today. And this is where the story starts to get wild, because I wanted to find out where this building was. And it wasn't easy because I spent far too long examining every nook and cranny of this city plan and could not find this letter I. Because remember, there are 2 I's on this list. I was able to find the other one easy enough because it's right where they told me it was. But this one, not so much. And so I had to do a little digging, and I came across this article, which gives up all the dirt with its deep dive into the history of almshouses and hospitals in Maryland. And so apparently the homeless vagrant problem was so bad in Baltimore right before the Revolutionary War that the lives of the needy were measured in pounds of tobacco. And tobacco was legal currency. They issued notes for it and everything. But things were so out of control that they passed an act appropriating 4,000 pounds in credit to be paid to the trustees. And this credit was to be used to purchase land not exceeding 100 acres, but was convenient to Baltimore town, yet no closer than a half a mile from downtown. And lucky for them, a trustee just so happened to purchase such a lot for 350 pounds. And so we have to remember that this is before the Revolutionary War, and so the currency was British pounds, meaning that they appropriated 800,000 pounds, or just over $1 million today. But in the early 1800s, it was a very different story. In 1800, $1 equaled roughly $23 in purchasing power today, while a pound in 1800 was worth about $160 in purchasing power today. That's a huge difference. And so let's just stick that little fact into our back pocket for now, because they tell us that they use this appropriation of credit to buy a property bounded by Madison, Howard, Biddle, and Linden Streets, somewhere around here. And right away, I'm like, it has to be this black rectangle, right? I mean, it's the eye of this pyramid. And, but there is no letter I. Where is it? It's not here. But you know what is here? This shady looking guy right here. And so as luck would have it, I've ridden the light rail through this neighborhood a time or two, and I happen to know that on this spot today is the 5th Regiment Armory. And so let's take a look on Google Earth. All right, and so here we have Howard Street coming up, right? This is Howard Street, and I will show it on Google Earth. This is Howard Street, right? We're coming up Howard Street here. And this is the Armory. All right, and Howard Street even comes, that point is still here, that corner. And so this is Howard Street, and this is our shadowy friend, right? And this is Howard Street, and this is where the Armory is. And let's get up on it a little bit here, because I don't, unfortunately, have pictures of the Armory. Let's see where we get dropped here. Right on the light rail tracks. I'm on Howard Street, and here's the Armory, okay? So now, if you're thinking about, like, old world kind of structures, the Armory definitely has that feel. I mean, this thing looks and has the presence of a fortress. No doubt about it. And they tell us that it was built in 1901. Maybe they put that roof on it. Let's see. Maybe they put this roof on it in 1901. But something tells me that this thing was there. And that something is Poppleton's 1822 city plan. Right there. Here's Howard Street. There it is. This is Howard Street, and there it is. I mean, it's so close. And so at the time, I'm sure the city planners are like, well, what are we going to do with this? Do we keep it up? Do we knock it down?
What do you think, Harold? A, B? Oh, we'll put down C, not sure.
But anyway, just an amazing thing to find if you're looking to confirm your bias that they were hiding history. I mean, they don't label this thing. I mean, there's, but it's there. It's on this map. Ooh, is it on the other one? It is. There's something there. Ooh, they give this one. Look at that. It's the almshouse. I have to rewrite this whole thing. All right, so maybe not the whole thing, and we're going to file that under shit that happens when you go off script. But if anything, this actually becomes even more interesting, learning that Fielding drops it in on his map all nonchalantly, yet Poppleton, who provides a picture of the almshouse and tells us that these two houses cost a combined $140,000, he doesn't even put it on his map. I mean, this may be the almshouse, but he certainly isn't letting us know that. There's no I here, but you would not be able to find this landmark using this map. And that's very strange. And so I thought about that for a second and then realized that they're talking about 1774. And so I thought maybe the almshouse would be on the 1792 city plan. But wouldn't you know it, according to the 1792 city plan, this area of Baltimore is still undeveloped. Where is the almshouse? Where is this developed plot from 1774 in 1792? Certainly not on this map. Right? It just doesn't make sense that it wouldn't be here. But regardless, whether it's there or not, this article talks about how overcrowded the almshouse was and how difficult and expensive it was to provide quality care to the poor and homeless of Baltimore. But whether on this map or not, an almshouse is built, and during the yellow fever epidemic of 1794, they used the almshouse as a hospital. And after that pandemic is over, the city legislature decides to build a new hospital on this location, and they call this new hospital the Baltimore Public Hospital, which caters to strangers and seafaring men. Wait a minute, you mean this hospital? The one we were just told was founded by Captain Yella for clapped up and hungover sailors? How is that? This is nowhere near the intersection of Howard and Biddle Streets, and so I don't understand this at all. But apparently the almshouse gets kicked out in 1794 and is apparently homeless for the next 25 years, because the author doesn't provide a location for the almshouse before it moves into this enlargement in 1820. And this is very interesting because it certainly says nothing about an almshouse being built in 1815 by R.C. Long. So did either of these buildings even exist? It's hard to say. But they tell us in the years between the hospital and this new enlargement that the almshouse becomes a training hospital for young doctors and a home to the father of vaccination, Dr. Jimmy Smith, who puts his root down into the experimental subjects known as the homeless. But somewhere between 1794 and 1820, the problem with the almshouse becomes that it and its undesirables are located too close to the ever-expanding downtown area. And this is where trustee Jonathan Meredith saves the day with the purchase of this Calverton estate in 1820. A location they're kind enough to give me coordinates for, and a worse location could hardly have been found between all the raw sewage and mosquito-borne disease. And I just love that they threw that in there. Even more so because Benji paints a much different picture, making it seem like this is a lovely place for an afternoon stroll. No malaria or dysentery to be to be caught here. And finished or not, in December of 1820, 533 paupers were moved in. And so now it was time to finally find the almshouse on this map. But try as I might, I could not find it. And that's because this location is located off the map. And I had to use Google Earth to determine this. It is really just outside of the city borders for every city plan that I have. And so now I have to ask, why would you list a landmark on this map that you couldn't find, especially with the amount of money involved? Between the two buildings, they sank almost $4 million into these two houses. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the money when we wrap things up as well. But one last thing before moving on is that the first location for the almshouse that definitely existed, despite not being on the map, is awfully close to where our boy the sheriff resided. And I'm sure that he had many uses for the young and able-bodied homeless of Baltimore. Just like our friends in the Freemasons, whose Masonic Hall is next up on the top shelf. And the Masons built this nifty little temple for themselves. And we know all about the Masons, the true architects of America. even though they don't formally put themselves in the record, in Maryland anyway, until 1787. And the Grand Lodge of Maryland is, of course, of the ancient, free, and accepted variety, ultimately putting it under the province of our boy the Grand Poobah, who may be running the show here and here, because we have to keep in mind that there are lots of power players crawling around Baltimore at this time. And so you better believe that the Masons needed a first-rate temple for themselves in Baltimore. And Poppleton tells us that this thing took 9 years to build, construction starting in 1813 and finishing in 1822. That is an awfully long time for a building like this, especially with its fairly modest price tag. Googly and I put this $35,000 at roughly $850,000 today. So less than $1 million. And I love this building, especially the statue, which appears to be a cloaked figure cradling something. Regardless, it would be fitting because a woman cradling a baby or a small child is one of sculptors' and artists' favorite tropes for charity. And the Freemasons consider themselves a charitable organization. And so in Mud City, the Grand Poobah's Freemasons are charitably discharging their political control system into the new American government right out of Baltimore, out of this building designed by J. Small. And we're going to talk more about him later as well. And so with this address, this building is going to be near the courthouse. And it is. But wait a minute. Where is the K? Here's the courthouse. It has its corresponding letter. Fielding Lucas includes it on his map. And so what's going on with Tommy Boy and his map? Why isn't he labeling the location of the buildings he's showing us pictures of? It just doesn't make sense and makes me even more skeptical of the legitimacy of this map. You know, missing letters, shadow buildings, badly cut and pasted borders. This map is a shambles. And as much as I love this image, let's take a look at Benji Latrobe's 1832 image for a comparison. And even if this is 10 years later, what happened to charity? And so I understand that things happen to statues, but this space wasn't designed to be empty. Check out this sunburst pattern in the dome. Whatever statue was placed in front of it would look like it was glowing. And so I think that's pretty cool. And given the rest of the detail of this drawing, it may as well be a photograph. And filtered through the Mud City prism, this drawing makes me think that they recovered this doorway or gateway and built around it. You know, that they probably found something that looked like this. And I'm sure there are better Greco-Roman examples, but this is what came to mind when I thought about this, and so that's what I got. And so, so they had this front piece, and maybe this foundation or parts of it, and built the rest around that, because my failing and untrained eyes are seeing two different builds here. And if I had to guess, some of this was exposed red brick against the marble facade. But maybe my favorite part of this picture is the cast of characters. We have mother and daughter over here, little girl pointing at something, who knows, maybe a dirigible, right? We have this strolling couple. This guy, Colonel McBragging, his heroic deeds during the War of 1812, which happened right on this very street. And then we have this constable leaning against the fence back here, who looks like he's pretending not to notice his partner getting serviced in the doorway of the basement of the Masonic Temple. Who knows, maybe he's waiting his turn, right? But one thing is for certain, is that it's in front of this building that William Preston Esquire delivers his 9-minute commercial for the Stars and Bars, which children are selling all over the city that day. But unfortunately, this building only lasts about 44 years before they knock it down and move into this one in 1866, of course. And so up next on the top shelf is the Holiday Street Theater, best remembered as the place where Francis Scott Key's Star-Spangled Banner was performed for the very first time. But perhaps maybe even more important to Mud City, this is where Eliza Poe performed when she was in Baltimore. And so I didn't check in on the dates on this, but I do remember that, she was conceivably conceived in the back rooms of the theater at the Lyceum in London by Benedict Arnold. And so wouldn't it be fitting if Edgar Allan Poe was conceived in the back room of the Holiday Theater? And so I just had to know. And so, given Eddie's January 1809 birthday, he was likely conceived in March of 1808, when his mother Eliza would have been in Boston. At least this is according to Googly. But the Holiday Street Theater may have looked very different in 1805 when she performed there, because Poppleton tells us that it was rebuilt by Warren and Wood, and it was built in 1818 by our old friend R.C. Long, right? So that makes 6 along the top shelf for him. And we're told that this rebuild cost $50,000, or roughly $1.3 million today. But the theater itself dates back to 1794-1795. But this is where Wiki and Poppleton disagree. While Poppleton says it was rebuilt in 1818, Wiki tells us that this happened in 1813. And so, who gets this wrong? But regardless of when this thing was allegedly built, it had an up and down existence for the next 95 years, before it's ultimately demolished in 1917. And to demonstrate where the theater was in relation to many of the other top-shelf landmarks, it was right next door to the assembly rooms and a block away from the Exchange and Custom House and Rembrandt's Museum, and it was 2 blocks away from the monument, the courthouse, and the Masonic Hall. And so this is a prime location. And this is what those visiting in 1832 could expect to see when looking for the Holiday Street Theater. And there is a picture of the theater taken at some point before its demolition. And so here it is. And so do you notice anything different? Where did this bottom floor come from? In 1822, this thing has 2 floors. Yet, whenever this photo was taken, there are 3. And so while the narrative does mention rebuilds, they don't talk about to what extent. And so, did they knock the top off of this thing and replace it with an exact replica while adding a 3rd floor? Or did they just dig out more of this building as the recovery process continued? I certainly couldn't tell you, but it's definitely interesting to say the least. And so this brings us to the last entry along the top shelf, the Unitarian Church. And this boob in a box was erected in 1818 by the Unitarian Society from a design by Godefroy, and it's dedicated in 1819 with the cost of $100,000, or just over $2.5 million today. Money well spent because it's still standing. And I've been fascinated with this building and the Unitarians ever since they came on my radar, because somehow they won up the Catholics and get this thing built before the Basilica, openly trolling the diocese by putting their church across the street. I just love that. Maybe as much as I love the fact that Unitarianism has its origins in Transylvania. They're evil bloodsuckers who only come out at night. And then there's that pesky Unitarian Islamic connection, because Mud City sees the Unitarian Church as a covert mosque used by Ottoman dignitaries when they were in town. And the Unitarians came on my radar recently when I came across this article while looking into the Maryland Jew Bill of 1826. Suffer not the evil one. And this article casts the minority Jews and Unitarians as the enemy of true Christians. Sound familiar? But if there is one thing that this article makes clear, it's that the Unitarians and the Jews were definitely in the minority. This article says that there were roughly 150 Jews in the whole state, let alone Baltimore. And the Unitarian numbers were small but vocal. And seeing that Unitarianism was brand spanking new in 1818, not only in Baltimore, but in America as well, how many of them could there have been? How did they have the money and influence enough to get this church built across the street from the Basilica, a building allegedly years in the making, without being a beard for something? The story of Unitarianism in Baltimore stinks. And for all the bitching the far right does about an Islamic takeover of America, Mud City is finding evidence that they've been here the whole time and maybe have been running the show that long as well. I don't know. And so wrapping up our tour of the top shelf in the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore, let's take a look at Benji Latrobe's illustration of it, right? And, it does give the sense that this is on top of a hill here. So I really like this drawing and definitely didn't want to leave it out. But we're not done. There are a few more landmarks I'd like to talk about, and the next 2 are brought to us by the letters M and Z, and these are the penitentiaries, and they're located right next to each other, and I love the bold shapes that Poppleton gives them. Fielding doesn't go so far, and here's an approximation of what that may have looked like, and Poppleton tells us that the penitentiary was built by the state of Maryland, so the taxpayers. and that it was finished in 1811 and cost $114,000, just north of $3 million today. And it was designed by one D. Kahn. And I first read that, I was like, wait a minute, is that a joke? That the penitentiary was designed by a Kahn? Right? But there it is. And the neighboring jail was built by Baltimore County, who I guess got double dipped with the taxes, having to pay for the penitentiary too out of state taxes. I don't know how the taxation worked in 1800, but these were allegedly publicly funded buildings. And the jail was finished in 1800. And it cost $90,000, or about $2.3 million today. And it's another R.C. Long design, bringing his running total to 7. And speaking of architects, let's take a look at Benji's vision of prisons as tourist destinations. Both the jail and the penitentiary seem to be lovely places to visit if you're from out of town, right? So it's a good thing that they're located right next to each other. And this story gets better because living in Baltimore and doing what I do, I happen to know that this Madison Street location is home to Baltimore's very own prison castle, which we're told was built between 1855 and 1859. So it's not even on my 1851 city plan. Though by this time they've clearly expanded. And that's the narrative's story with these prisons. They don't last very long and end up getting knocked down in the 1850s, and new prisons are built on the same spot, of course. And those prisons were knocked down themselves in 2020, leaving the block looking like this. But an old tower does still stand in the top right corner. But how perfect is this castle? And in Mud City, this thing would have been there right alongside these two buildings, most likely predating them. And this doorway would have been an entrance into Colonel Howard's Funtime Royal Forest. And it would have been situated here in the grand scheme of things. It is hard to get better than having this castle right outside Howard's Woods. And so this is where I have to wind it down. But before I close this one out, let's take a minute and talk about the obelisks, shall we? The Battle and Washington monuments, which are, of course, still standing today. And I call them obelisks because that's exactly what I think they were. And I think this because of Cleopatra's Needle, which was standing in Baltimore in 1880. And this is a story I go deeper into in the Baltimore Jubilee of 1880 episode. And here's a picture of it. And this thing has to be at least 70 or 80 feet tall. But we're told that this is a replica of the needles that were being erected in New York, London, and Paris. And spoiler alert for the Jubilee of 1880 episode, the story of Cleopatra's Needles stinks. This is an old world obelisk that they needed a story for and then erased. And I think they erased the other obelisks in the city by turning them into these monuments. You know, maybe they were broken or toppled over and these bases were repurposed, or maybe they were chiseled into these shapes. Who knows? I don't know. And so it just makes more sense to Mud City that the battle monument didn't cost $40,000 to build. It cost $40,000 to turn this into this. Mary, you're welcome to drop as much battle monument knowledge as you want in the comments section. I'll leave that up to you. And we're told that Benji's buddy Godefroy is the one responsible for this fascist design. And the woman holding the wreath over her head is a symbol of victory, which makes sense, right? But these tapered angles sure look like they make a point as if this were an obelisk. And the same is true of the Washington Monument, though this drawing doesn't have Georgie Boy standing on top of it the way that he does. He adds significant height. And check out George Washington's face on this thing. Does this look like the dollar bill, George, to you? And we're told that this thing took 14 years to build at a cost of $150,000, which Google and I put at just over $4 million today. And we're told that this one was designed by R. Mills. And one really cool thing about Washington Monument is that you can take the stairs all the way to the top if you were so inclined. And so I'm going to wrap this section up here with Latrobe's 1832 illustrations of them, which he manages to get key details wrong. He misplaces the wreath over here, and he doesn't have Washington extending his arm over here. These are clearly visible details, so it's very interesting that he gets these wrong here. And so we're going to use this as a springboard to talk about the architects. and whether or not there was just a very small cabal of them involved in the scheme to either hide or cover up these already existing landmarks. A cabal perhaps run by our new friend Benjamin Henry Latrobe. And so unfortunately, this is where the sidewalk ends for Mud City. And so to wrap it up, if there was this massive civil construction project or reconstruction project, as the case may be, and you were trying to hide considerable sums of money behind said projects, whether these buildings were rehabbed old world structures or just cheap brick and plaster knockoffs, well then the cover-up might look like any other pyramid scheme, with Benji at the top and him doling out responsibilities to his lieutenants like R.C. Long, Godefroy, and Milliman, who in turn create fake architects like D. Khan, who gets credit for the penitentiary, to obfuscate their involvement or intentions. Because in some cases, literal fortunes were spent in either building or improving these structures, only to see them fall apart after a few years or have them get prematurely demolished. So the potential for a very real estate fraud scheme is there, however you want to paint the story. And I did start looking into the costs of materials and labor and even into how much Benji Latrobe was paid as an architect. But sadly, I have run out of time, and I had really hoped to get this one finished, but yeah, that's just Mud City for you. And while I'm calling this a farewell, the door is open to future episodes. I just no longer have the time to give Mud City the attention it deserves. And so it's just time to walk away, and hopefully I'll find my way back. I certainly hope to. So until then, remember guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies. Cheers.
Leave me alone. Well, I found out what this said. Leave me alone till I'm okay. Don't go too far. about the state of my place. It doesn't bother me. 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 Say whatever you have to say. It doesn't bother me. Could very well be my last today. It doesn't bother me. Who'd you think I was? I was calling out your name whenever shadows were around. Did they so obscure my face? Whatever could it mean? That the lights have all gone dark, perhaps the lights were never on. That's why we could only get so far. Losing my grip on you. But I never lost my sense of reality. I did it for you, I did it for me. Did it so everyone can see. I did it for you, I did it for me. I did it for you, I did it for me. Did it so everyone can see. I did it for you, I did it for me. So whoever could have thought when you called out my name that who I thought I was, who I am, I'm not the same. So I guess it's all that's left is to act like what I did was never what it was, and something else instead. Just losing my grip on you. But I never lost my sense of the real thing. I did it for you, I did it for me. Did it so everyone can see. I did it for you, I did it for me. I did it for you, I did it for me. I did it so everyone can see. I did it for you, I did it for me. I did it for you, I did it for me. I did it so everyone can see. I did it for you, I did it for me. I did it for you, I did it for me. I did it so everyone can see. I did it for you, I did it for me. So who'd you think I was when I was calling